Sehar Delijani was born 30 years ago in prison in Tehran. Her mother was among thousands of political prisoners rounded up in the wake of Iran's Islamic Revolution. So was her father. 5 years later, thousands of those prisoners were massacred. Delijani's uncle was among them. Her parents survived only because by then they'd served their sentences and been released. Her first novel, Children of the Jacaranda Tree, tells the story of some of those dissidents, their friends, their families and their children. And it begins with the birth of a baby in prison. Sehar Delijani, how much of this book is based on your own and your family's experience?
Well, the book is inspired by my family's experience in prison and outside of prison. I think I would say that it's a mix. At this point, I don't even know what parts are real and what parts are fiction, because even the fiction has been, based on some things that I lived through. But I would say the basis of the novel is real.
And these are stories of people based on your family and your family's friends and their children, and they're stories of what happens to families when parents are imprisoned, when aunts and uncles and grandparents have to bring up the children, and children are told, for instance, that there are certain things they mustn't talk about with their school friends. And that was something up until the age of 12 you experienced.
Yes, exactly. It is about those people in prison, but it is about especially their families, what they went through, all the fear that they had, and all the hopes that they had for the prisoners to be out. And yes, one of those things was that I was afraid of telling anybody about my family's background. I wasn't sure exactly why I'm afraid, but I think as a child maybe I thought that they would come back again and take them away, or something horrible might happen to them. And I think it's something that a lot of families lived through. Because in a way, I mean, the regime created that fear. For example, when my uncle was executed, my grandma and his family could not even mourn him. Like a funeral was forbidden to them. So that sort of silence creates a fear that you just live with all your life.
Now, your uncle died in 1988. You were born in 83, and there was a mass arrest of dissidents in the early 80s. And then in 88, towards the end of the Iran-Iraq war, thousands of the dissidents still in prison, including your uncle, were murdered. Now, I didn't know about that. I suspect a lot of people outside Iran don't know about it. How many people inside Iran then?
That's the interesting thing. I don't even think many people inside Iran knew about it, and still, hopefully, with this book, they will know about it more. But it was done in secret. It was done very quickly, especially with the executions in that summer, August and September, and I would say, it was the last year of the war, as you said, that there was a lot of confusion, a lot of chaos. People were trying to escape all the bombings and so on. So I think some people were trying to survive. Some people were too afraid to look too deeply into what was going on in prisons. And so, yes, I don't think many people knew.
This book has been written in English, which I think is your second language. Mm-hmm. You grew up speaking Farsi. You left Iran with your parents at the age of 12 to go to California. I'm told you write poetry in Farsi. Yeah. So the first question is, why write a novel in English?
It's an interesting question. I don't really have an answer for it, because when I was writing poetry, I automatically wrote it in Farsi, even though there were a few poems I wrote in English, but mostly just automatically I would sit there and the poem would come in Farsi. And when I decided to write stories and novels, it would just automatically come to me in English. So it wasn't a choice. It was just at that point I was more comfortable writing it in English. I don't know which part of my brain works for the poetry part and which one for the English novel part.
But part of your intention, as I understand it, is to alert people in Iran to what happened in the 1980s. If you write in English, how is that possible?
Yeah, but at the same time, it could be translated. It is actually being translated by my father, so we will get the book to the Iranians and to Iranians inside Iran especially.
But can it be published there? Officially?
No. Most probably not. There are publishing houses outside of Iran, and there is a very well-developed underground publishing world inside Iran. So I think once we've done the translation, we will decide what's the best thing to do.
Is there a danger that people who've lived in Iran through all their lives will look at this account if they read it and say it's all right for her. She's now in a privileged position. She lives in Italy. She's safe. She's an outsider. She can't really understand what we have gone through in the past 20 years in Iran itself. She can't understand the circumstances there now.
Yeah, I'm sure there are some people who would think that, and I'm sure they're probably right. It's true that I've lived most of my life outside of Iran, and that's why in the book, especially in the second chapter and the second half of the book, which is about the children who are grown up and look back at the history, when there is a sense of interpretation in the book, I have it from the point of view of someone who's coming from the outside. I wanted to be honest about that. So whatever I say about Iran, I say whatever I know and I've lived and I've heard, but I don't, make any claims. I don't pretend to know Iran just like an Iranian who lives there would know, but I try to give it my best shot and my best interpretation of the country I know.
Now, when you were writing this book, Iran was going through an upheaval in 2009 after the Green Movement, which was put down pretty violently, pretty aggressively by the authorities.
More images continue to emerge of the past week's violence. This video was sent to the BBC. We can't verify its source, but it appears to show shooting from a militia base.
Link for me, if you will, what happened in the 1980s with what happened in 2009. Should lessons have been learned? Have lessons been learned by Iranians, do you think?
No, it's a very, very delicate question, and it requires a very delicate answer as well, I think. I do think that when we know about history, when we know what has happened in our past, we could be a little bit more prepared. Now, that does not mean the same violence would not have happened. But in some ways, I felt like in 2009, we were caught off guard. And we were shocked by the violence that they were capable of. But at the same time, I remember speaking to my family at the time, and they said, but they're still the same people. They're still the same people who executed thousands in one summer alone. So what has changed? Nothing has changed. So we shouldn't have been as shocked as we were. And I think they were right. But at the same time, I think so much has to change for history not to repeat itself anymore. And I hope that a book in very, very, very small part, could help in doing that.
Sehar Delijani, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.